Today's goal, we'll see how we do. Today's goal is we're going to finish chapter 1 and get through chapter 2. And then next week we can do 3 and 4 and call it a day. So that's kind of that's the plan. We'll see. You know, the plan was to go slowly. So we have a lot of time to cover 4 chapters, but I hope that what you've already seen from last week is this book is so rich. It's really, you know, I think I probably said this last week, that I spend a fair amount of time in the school with the children. And, you know, of course we want them to appreciate the Torah and the Bible stories that we teach them. And then for so many people, they stop their formal Jewish education, you know, after 13. Or, you know, if we're really lucky, we get them, you know, we get them to stay through confirmation or whatever, you know, grade that is. And then they miss all of this stuff. Just to give you a little preview, some of it's a little racy. So that's what also makes the book of Ruth a little, you know, interesting. And of course, you know, you kind of avoid talking about children until they're, you know, until they're the right age, and then you only hope and pray that by the time they're the right age, they're still around. So let's go to chapter 1, and we are going to start at verse 14.
What page?
We are on page 1742. 1742. So just to remind you from last week where we were still in Moab, and Naomi, of course, has lost her husband and her sons, and she is with her daughters-in-law, which was beautifully pointed out, the transition in the text when she calls them her daughters and not her daughters-in-law. She makes this unbelievable emotional transition, and she blesses them, right? She blesses them, which is important to remember when we meet Boaz. We're going to meet hopefully this morning. So the language of blessing. So in our tradition, I mean, we have a long tradition of blessing people, but when we think about blessing, who, I don't know how to, I'm trying to think how to ask this so I get the right answer.
Did you find it?
Okay, let's start with this. Who blesses whom? Usually in our tradition, when people bless people, who does the blessing? Parents or children, rabbis. So usually we would say people that are older bless people that are younger. People that are of one status bless people that are of another status. I don't think that we have many examples that I can think of where we would say children blesses their parents. Right? We think of parents blessing children. So we think of an older generation bestowing blessings on a younger generation. So, and yes?
So this has always confused me. So why do we say, blessed are you, God?
Okay, we also bless God. Okay, so I should have been more specific, because that's true. We actually do utter blessings, and human beings utter blessings to a being that we would definitely say is of a different status. So actually, I'm glad that you clarified that. So I was actually thinking very specifically, when one human being blesses another, it's usually, we think of somebody that's older doing it to somebody that's younger. Of course, Jews utter blessings all the time to God. And in this case, you know, obviously a direct translation of that would be, blessed are you, O Lord our God, who, you know, blah, 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 blah. Sometimes, a little more respect than that. Sometimes in English they translate it as, praised are you. And in some way, I think that translation might actually be, even though it's not literal, maybe more actually accurate, because what we're really doing is thanking God, right? We're thanking God for, sometimes we're thanking God for our commandments, right? Thank you for commanding us to light the Shabbat lights. Thank you for commanding us to sit in a sukkah. But sometimes they're just blessings of, you know, gratitude for the things that we have in our lives. So yes, in that case, it's status kind of like, doesn't matter. But when human beings bless other human beings, we tend to really, I think it does really usually, not even usually, I think almost always, is somebody that's older blessing someone that's younger. So, I didn't grow up in a traditional Jewish home, so we didn't say, the Friday night blessings when you bless. Traditionally, you bless your children at the Shabbat table. And so I didn't grow up like that, but my husband did. He grew up in a house where they had Shabbat dinner every Friday night, and his father blessed the children. And then, I became a rabbi, and then I, have the privilege of blessing people, with the baby naming, at a bris, at a bar mitzvah, at a wedding. And I was probably, maybe 10 years into the rabbinate, and I was at a rabbinical convention. And at the end of the session, they said, turn to each other and bless each other. And so one of my female colleagues, blessed me. And she actually did it in female gender Hebrew, which was very powerful to me also. It was the first time in my life that anybody had blessed me. And it was very emotional. It was very, very emotional. And, we're sort of going through this transition in our home because we're just a few days away from officially being empty nesters, as our middle one is moving to Washington, D.C. And we always had blessed our children at the Friday night table. And now, there are many Friday nights where we have no children at the Shabbat table. And my husband and I look at each other and go, well, this is an interesting, this is an interesting place to be. So it's very powerful, right? This idea, this palpable idea of what it means to utter blessing. So when Naomi, this is a very long way of saying that when Naomi blesses her daughter-in-law, this woman who is, empty, who's lost everything, who still has the ability to utter any blessings, but it's also important to remember this when we meet Boaz about what does it mean when what does it tell us, the reader, about him when he also utters blessings. So we just sort of keep that in mind. So let's start. We're going to back up just for a moment to 13. We already talked about this last week, right? Should you wait? She's not going to have any more sons, but even if she should you wait for them to grow up? Should you on their account debar yourselves from marriage? Oh no, my daughters. So such a beautiful transition, right? Oh no, my daughters. My lot is far more bitter than yours, for the hand of the Lord has struck out against me. So if you had any question up until now as to what is Naomi thinking about her fate, she feels bad for her daughter-in-law. She obviously cares about them and calls them daughters, but she feels that they still have a chance to start over. But for her, her lot is bitter, and she looks at it as what? Hopeless. Right? Hopeless, and who did this to her? God. God, right? I mean, this is God has left her in this position as a widow who's lost both of her sons. So you feel, it's very painful sympathy for Naomi at this moment.
How old do you think she would be?
That's an interesting question. The text doesn't tell us certain things, but let's assume that she married young and had her children young. So and this is just like a guess, but let's say if she was a mother by the time she was 15, and then her sons grow up and they marry, and let's say they marry young, so let's say she's 30, right? And then they're married for 10 years, right? So she's 40. She could be a little bit younger, she could be a little bit older, but 40 then is not 40 now. So somebody said to me, I thought this was very funny, that people say 60 is the new 50, and you're like, oh, as I'm in my mid-50s, that sounds really good. So somebody said to me, but the flip side of that is that 30 is the new 20. And it's like, as parents of kids who are, in their 20s, it's like, well, that didn't sound quite as appealing. But in a way, I think sociologically, it's probably true, right? If a kid comes to mind, if a young couple comes to me and they want to get married and they're 22, I would be like, oh my goodness, what are they rushing into? But, I was married at 25, my mother was married at 18, it didn't work out so well, so But in any case, but you know, for generations, 22 was actually maybe a little on the older side. By the time they're settled in a profession, and you know, and I mean, I was really surprised. Our middle one just graduated college in June, and he's finally got a job, and we're very happy, and he's moving to Washington, D.C., and it's all good, but it's felt like a long 6 months. But I was surprised how many of our, my peers suggested that a reasonable solution to his job search was for us to move him to Washington, D.C. and pay for him to have a place to live until he found a job. And that didn't sound that reasonable to me. Got a 3-bedroom upstairs in our house. That didn't even sound reasonable to my husband. But what we expect, right, is obviously very different in this day and age. So 40-ish, she should have long been a grandmother by then, if these people hadn't, they hadn't died, childless. So she feels that this is it, right? She's past her childbearing years, or maybe she's not, because she does imply that, that biologically she could have more children. But, she's really at the end. She's not going to have any children. She certainly thinks at this point she's not going to have any grandchildren. And her life is, her lot is bitter. Her lot is incredibly bitter. But she says to these young women, young-ish women, for their day and age, being widowed after 10 years, they're not considered, so young either, but at least they have another opportunity to start their lives. So they broke into weeping again, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law farewell, but Ruth clung to her. So, interesting little fact about the name Orpah. What does Orpah actually mean in Hebrew? It means the back of the neck. It means the back of the neck. So what's the last thing Naomi sees of Orpah? It is the back of her neck. Which is about the only thing in the text that indicates that she's doing what anybody would do. Right? She's going to set out with her mother-in-law to a foreign country where she's never, never lived, doesn't speak the language, and leave the only family that she might have in Moab and set out to the land of Israel. Like, that does seem, and Naomi tells her to go. So she goes. She does. I don't think that we should judge her really negatively, but she goes. But the text does give us that little indication, Miss Back of the Neck. What do we say when we, there's a phrase in English, right? When you turn your back on someone, that's not a great connotation. Right? It's not a great connotation to do that to somebody. It indicates negative, you're indifferent, right? When you turn your back on someone, you're indifferent to whatever it is that they're going through. So, as I said, her name may be just a little indication, and that's, how she's remembered then for the rest of the story. But I don't think we should be too harsh to her, really, because what would we really expect her to do? Now, Ruth does something, the phrase in Hebrew for Ruth is, what does Ruth do to Naomi? Clings, right? Clings to her. And I think that's a really, that's a very powerful phrase, right? That's a very, very powerful phrase about what it means to cling to somebody. Especially, somebody who's lost everything. Now she has somebody that's going to cling to her. It's going to stick with her, isn't going to let go. So that tells us, what Ruth is all about. So, she said, see your sister-in-law. What does she call her? Right? Your sister-in-law.
Not a sister, not a daughter.
Right. Not my daughter anymore, right? Not even my daughter-in-law. Your sister-in-law, right? Ever do that? Or what your son did today? Right? Your father, like, generally speaking, you usually say this, it expresses some sort of displeasure. There's certainly a distancing. We're gonna...
I disagree with you.
Right, like, so it's like your sister-in-law, right? She's, again, the text has these little,
Human interest. It's a human kind of thing, is it not? That's no.
Right. she's not staying anymore, right? She's not staying. She's leaving. And in some ways, she's declaring she's a Moabitess, right? So she's going back to her people. So she's not a daughter or a daughter-in-law. She's more of a sister to Ruth or a sister-in-law to Ruth because of their shared common bond. But your sister-in-law is not at this moment. You're sounding too good.
Okay, but she also goes on to say, enter her gods. So they were married for 10 years. What kind of life did they live? Were they observant to Naomi's God? Or was it something that they never left their own culture?
That's a very excellent, excellent question. What do you think it says when it says not only your sister-in-law, but what does it say? She's going to return to her gods. Could imply that while they were married, I mean, it makes sense. It could make sense to assume that even though they were Moabitesses and the young men were living in that culture, this may show us that they didn't give up the Israelite religion, right? So, and it would make sense that a woman became what her husband was. I mean, that's what happens, you know, when you move into a daughter would leave her parents' household and go into the household of her in-laws, and she would in some ways become what they were.
I think the word return tells it.
Right.
She's going back.
She's going back. And again, remember we talked that return is shuv. And so there's a lot of coming and going in the story, left and shuv, go and return, go and return. And what is, you know, where are you going and where are you returning? And with all of this action of going and returning, Ruth is clinging. So she's not, you know, going anywhere, right? She's not going anywhere but where Naomi goes. So yes, she's returned to her people and her gods. I'm glad that you pointed that out. Because it does say that, you know, whatever was happening. But I think it does, I think we could also take from this that the two sons, sickness and death, Machlon and Chilion and Elimelech and Naomi never, you know, worshiped those gods. Right? That they didn't worship those gods, and neither did these young women while they were in the household. But it's interesting that there's nowhere that Naomi implies that there's anything wrong with that. Or the sense of like, wow, after 10 years, you know, in our household, it would be absolutely logical that they were so enamored of the Israelite religion that they would never consider going back. Listen, I mean, this has happened, I mean, I've seen it happen, right, where somebody converts to get married, and they're married, and they live with this person for X number of years, and then they divorce, and that person does not stay Jewish. And it's kind of a, you know, it's kind, I mean, obviously it's a sad thing for many reasons, and if there's children, it becomes very confusing, but it's like, wow, we had X number of years to sell you, and we didn't sell you. You know? You lived like a Jewish person for these number of years, and listen, this happens between Jews too. I mean, I see this all the time between Jews, where one person becomes more observant when they get married because their spouse is more observant, and they start doing the expectations of their spouse, maybe going to synagogue or keeping a kosher home or whatever it is, and then they get divorced, and that person stops doing that. And I feel the same way. It's like, we had, you know, you had X number of years that this is, it was supposed to be so, like it was supposed to be self-evident that this was so wonderful, and we didn't sell you. So that's kind of, I think, we, you know, did a bad job.
But on the other hand, so frequently, I think is the case, that when, even an interfaith couple, when somebody isn't Jewish, that the non-Jewish person becomes more Jewish than the
Yes,
non-Jewish.
I've seen that
Certainly
too.
the person who converts.
Well, I had a woman that I worked with for conversion, and her husband was, you know, born Jewish, and, you know, he didn't want to change. He felt very secure in his Jewish identity, and what he did or didn't do was fine. She said to me, but I don't do Jewish things, and I feel like I'm still an Episcopalian. So I've seen that too. It's a very interesting phenomenon where the Jewish spouse doesn't want to change, but the expectation is, you know, the other person should change, and sometimes I've seen that too, where all of a sudden they get very excited about doing Jewish things, and the other the Jewish spouse was like, I really didn't think I was going to start, we were going to do that.
Whenever I hear this story, and I know, because I think I know what's happening next, I always consider, like, what if the tables were turned and it is a Christian or a Moabite family, and if it was my child that married the Moabite, I'd want her back home too.
Right.
So how does the Christian family feel, or the non-Israeli, Israelite partner? It's still in their marrow as well. It's part of who they are. And it's not so much a rejection of who you're with, but it's return. Again, the return to.
Right, what is it? I had a young woman once who, converted to Judaism and decided to have an adult bat mitzvah. And she invited her non-Jewish family from, they lived out of state and they came, and they were very observant Christians. And during the Kiddush, the aunt said to me, "This is really very hard for us. And we love her and we're here to support her, but this is very hard for us." And it's like, wow. I mean, well, could you imagine? I mean, it's not just somebody that converted, but you were invited to whatever. I mean, of course, we understand that. And so the logic, so we're, and we're sort of used to it in the other, in the other way, how it feels when it's our community. But certainly, if people have whatever beliefs they have, and their child leaves those, that tradition, it's got to be very painful.
Yeah, but Elimelech and Naomi chose to leave Bethlehem and go where they were outsiders and stay there for a very long time. What can you expect?
That's right.
This was determined. Where these boys going to marry? If not Moabites, that's what happens if you move out of the Jewish community.
That's right. That's right. And the truth is, even today, even today.
This was kind of, they never should have left Bethlehem to begin with.
They were starving.
They were starving. Yeah, but other people stayed. There was still a Jewish community. There were still Israelites there to go back to and worked it out. They left. This is what happens.
Well, I mean, the truth is, I think about this a lot because obviously, my kids are of the age. I've got 2 college graduates, but there's been, and my youngest is in college now, so lots of talk about, for over the past years about where to go to school and all of that. And, you chose, when your kid chooses a place where there are no Jewish kids, the chances are of them meeting a Jewish, though, interestingly enough, I will say, and I wasn't sure if this was good news or bad news, but the Jewish community, when we talk about things happening later, very few people in the Jewish community now meet their spouses while they're in college. So I'm like, okay, so the pressure's off them. Where they go to college. They don't have to worry about the next level. It's very just interesting. I mean, at most college-age people, this is true for. I mean, most kids that go to college, this is statistically true. And since Jewish young people go to college in such large percentages in our community, and it's like, I don't know, 80, 90%. It's really, really high. They're part of this sociological phenomena. So in the 50s and in the 60s and even in the 70s, college was an amazing place to meet other Jewish young people because there were lots of people there. Today, since nobody's looking for their spouse at 20, it'll be interesting to see how this all plays out.
Thankfully, there's Hillel.
Thankfully, there's Hillel. Thankfully, there's
Want to
Hillel.
reach out.
If they go. If they go. Right, there's lots of other, okay, so we're a little off. She's not going back to college. She's going back to her parents' house, and that's it. Okay. So follow your sister-in-law. And this is, of course, the beautiful, beautiful speech of Ruth. I really loved my mother-in-law. Unfortunately, she passed away young. She passed away at 64, and there was, she had worked at Debra College, and they had a memorial service for her there, and they asked me to participate, and I thought this was an appropriate thing to read. I always feel, I know that not everybody is fortunate to have a wonderful mother-in-law, but I sort of resent the, negative stereotypes of mother-in-laws, especially as I'm about to become one. I think it's really, it's unfortunate in our community because sometimes it proves to be true, but I think it's unfortunate that mother-in-law in our society has a very negative stereotype associated with it, which I think is very sexist, actually, because father-in-law has nothing associated with, it's just neutral, right? Father-in-law is just neutral. But mother-in-law, not so good, right? So this is sort of the different take on what it means to be a mother-in-law and a daughter-in-law. So Ruth replied, "Do not urge me to leave you, to turn back and not follow you. For wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. Thus and more may the Lord do to me, if anything but death departs me from you.
I just had to think of something. She said, your people will be my people, your God will be. It's almost implying that up until now, she wasn't following the Jewish faith.
Where she was going along, right? She was going along because she lived in the household, but it wasn't internalized. Which probably Orpah was going along. You know, she lived in that household, but given the opportunity, given the set of circumstances, she returned because it wasn't part of her, you know, inner, she wasn't sold. But Ruth, you know, it's such a beautiful, you know, I don't know if people do this anymore, but they used to read this at conversions, at adult conversions. I mean, it's unbelievable, not just, because who's she not? She's not just not leaving Naomi, right? She could have had a lovely speech about, you know, I'm not going to let you go all the way back to Judah alone, and I'm going to be with you because I care about you, and I'm going to take care of you. And we would have said, that's what an amazing woman to do that. I mean, it's a dangerous journey, and it was an amazing thing. But it's so much more than that, right? It's an eternal, I mean, in some ways, it almost is like a marriage vow, right? Till death do us part. A non-Jewish marriage vow, I wouldn't say that the Jewish wedding, but, you know, what we've come to think of as a marriage vow, right? We are going to be, what, you know, bound together. Everything that's important to you will be, well, I probably never said that even, but everything that's important to you will always be important to you. You say it, and then, of course, you realize that you didn't really mean it. In that way, you know, when you're young and you're, but in it, right, this is a total pledge, right? A total pledge to her religion, to her people, to her gods, till death do us part. And what does Naomi say in response to this unbelievable speech? When Naomi saw how determined she was to go with her, she ceased to argue with her, and the two went on until they reached Bethlehem.
It's a good mother.
It's a good mother-in-law. You think it's good that she said nothing? Like,
Yeah,
just
at this point.
At this point,
And
okay.
a lot of other points, but I think it's very significant that, first of all, in a broader sense, it shows her acceptance of her daughter-in-law's decision.
Okay.
And it shows her own character that she's saying, you don't have to do that.
Okay.
Kind of thing.
Okay. I'll read this.
So it's strength. It's Ruth's strength. And
It's
Naomi's.
That's beautiful, because I tend to think of it as like, you'd think that somebody might say, I mean, it's true, I think that's true. I mean, there's not one right thing, but I've always sort of thought of it as like, you might want to hear like, thank you. I love you too, I love you, like, I said it first and you didn't say it back.
I have another take on it, possibly. She's so dumbfounded that she's speechless at this point.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But when you said it, it made me think of, and I think about this a lot for really my whole life, but, you know, what does it mean to, like, take a compliment or have somebody do something for you? I mean, I do this, I hear myself doing it. I love your dress. I got it on sale. Like, what about just, thank you, thank you.
That's right.
But we also, and I think that your interpretation would fit this too, that, how many of us have a hard time taking something from other people? You know, if you've ever had a situation where, I don't know, you couldn't do something you would normally do. You had an injury and you couldn't drive, or something happened and you couldn't cook, or whatever. You're a man, you can't go to work, you can't drive yourself to work, and people offer to do things for you. I mean, I'm sure you're all very happy and you're grateful and you're lovely people. But isn't there a part of you that, like, doesn't want to, like, it's hard to take help?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, this is such an emotional moment. What a compliment she is paying to her. You would think that she would have family, and she could very well have gone, but she wanted to go with Naomi, and this man rendered her speech.
Right, that's right. That's
I
what
mean,
they
it's
write that, like,
she was so emotional. She didn't know
that she
what to
couldn't even
say.
talk, that she
Right.
couldn't even speak.
Here's a guy, when I first went back to teaching, and I was 35 years old, and people were saying, and I was old, and people were saying, oh, you did this already, and I would do the same kind of thing. Oh, it's nothing. So I had a very wise principal, who was my contemporary, called me in his office one day and said, do you realize that you are insulting people when you reject a compliment?
Mm-hmm.
When you do not accept an offer made in good faith, like, can I drive you because I know your leg is broken? You are insulting the other person. So he was Jewish, so he really put it in the context of how Jews respond to things.
Wow, wow.
And ever since then, I've been very much of a thank you person.
I have a question. Right with this compliment business, so many people say, oh, you shouldn't have done that. And I never know how to respond to that. What do you say? I did it because I wanted to. That's too long.
It's too long. Do you have a response to that?
It's
A
kind
suggestion?
of like, for years we established a caring community within our sisterhood, our temple. And I would make the phone call, what could we bring you? And they said, oh, nothing. We got it all. And I said, okay, so this is how it is. We have a need. We need to do something. We need to show you. Would you prefer Chinese or Italian? I don't want to make a mistake here. You have any dietary things, but we're going to do something. So might as well be something that you're enjoying. Right. We need to do this. So you're doing her the favor.
That's really, it's a very interesting, it's an interesting, and I don't know if it's like American society that's like that, or if it's just human nature, or, I don't know, I don't know. But it's an interesting thing, and I think this idea that we need, like, if there's anything that I can do, but also what I really like too is my father always came to me and say, if there's anything I can do for you.
Yeah, right.
Like, are you going to then pick up the phone? Unless it's your close friend or relative, how often are you going to pick up the phone and say, well, actually there is, and could you do this, that, or the other thing? But to say, we're going to do it, so you want Chinese or Italian, if you need anything, call us back. Like, nobody's going to ever, people don't do that. So it could just be whatever it is at this moment, Naomi, or maybe there's nothing left to say, right? And the two of them go on together. I don't know that the Hebrew really supports this, because it's not the exact same in the Hebrew, but when it says the two of them go on together, what it reminds me of is the binding of Isaac. Right, that the two of them, Isaac says, where's the wood, where's the sacrifice, and then the two of them walk on silently after that. So I don't know if this is reflecting that, because the Hebrew's not exactly, the English reflects it more than the Hebrew, but the idea of this sacrifice that Ruth is making, this is the ultimate sacrifice. Of course, it definitely also gets us back to Abraham and Sarah, who are told by God, they're commanded by God. The thing that's amazing about Ruth is nobody commands her, she just does it, right? But it refers us back to Abraham, who God commands to leave your land, to go to the land that I will show you, this land that Ruth is now setting out to. It reminds us of Rebecca, who again, she's also not commanded, but decides that she will go with Abraham's servant so that she can then marry Isaac. And now we have Ruth. Now the Midrash, the rabbinic Midrash, view Abraham and Sarah as the father and mother of all converts. And this is actually reflected, I think some of you may know this, when somebody converts, traditionally when somebody converts to Judaism, they take a Hebrew name and then they're referred to as the son or daughter of Abraham and Sarah. Right? They're the first Jewish people. It's really very powerful because it sort of hooks you up with the idea that this person who's a convert actually has the stamp of the approval. Just like, we say, oh, we're all descendants of Abraham and Sarah. Well, guess what? Them too. So much so that they're even going to call the name of Abraham and Sarah. Okay, this is a total aside that has nothing to do with any of this, but I was watching, very interestingly, the other day, hard to watch the news and not hear about Ebola, and there was a woman that was cured, right? Here in the United States, she was cured, and there was footage of her visiting the president and the president hugging her. And I thought about in the Torah, when we read about leprosy, when a person is declared cured from leprosy, the high priest is the one that does it and goes out and brings them back to the community. Basically to say, this person has the stamp of approval. I, the high priest, am going to, if I, the president of the United States, is going to hug this woman, who would be you to like shun her and not assume that she's cured? And I thought that was really just fascinating. So it just reminded me when I was talking about that, that Abraham said, this is the stamp of approval, that this person is part of the Jewish people. And we've got very specific laws in Judaism about how we're supposed to treat converts.
I've worked with many people who converted or been in the process of converting. And because for people who are born Jewish, they're not Bat Abraham Sarai, they're Bat or Bar, whoever their parents are. So sometimes, from the perspective of the Jews, looking, the born Jews saying, okay, this is a stamp of approval, but it can also be a painful piece for people who are converting because in so many ways, they might feel like they're very sensitive to having sort of rejected the tradition or the whatever of their parents.
the convert.
Well, this is an
It's not the convert piece. It's saying I'm now not the daughter of my parents. I'm the daughter of somebody.
Okay, so I'll talk about that from my perspective. So to leave the names of your parents is an emotional thing, for sure. The other thing, actually, this is when you're in the liberal traditions of Judaism, you get so used to doing things a certain way that you actually forget that there are other ways people do it. And actually, what you do traditionally is Bat or Ben Avraham Avinu. Abraham, our father, which actually is now contradicting exactly what I said, because anytime if you are a man that you be called to the Torah, you're letting the entire community know that you're a convert. Because nobody else carries the name so-and-so Avinu. So in the conservative movement, people just say Abraham. I'm not sure what they do in the Reform movement. I would guess it's probably similar. So it's just Abraham, and of course now we use the mother's name, so it's Abraham and Sarah. So in some people could happen to have parents whose names were Abraham and Sarah, and so it doesn't put on this highlight that this person is a convert. And I do have some people, if I'm doing a ketubah of somebody that's converted, their Hebrew name is son or daughter of Abraham and Sarah, but in the English I always put the daughter of, I don't know, Fred and Ethel or whatever, so because their English name is still their name. And I have had people actually say to me over the years, I don't want to use Abraham and Sarah either because I don't want to indicate the possibility that every time I'm called to the Torah, somebody knows that I'm a convert. And I go, okay. That's the beauty of being in a liberal tradition. Jews okay. Were you going to add something to that? Or yes?
Can we back up to sacrifice for a minute, because I won't sleep if I don't get
Okay.
Maybe it wasn't really a sacrifice because she's lived all these years, perhaps, as a Jewish person with her husband. This has been her mother-in-law. So maybe this was her comfort level not to give this up, because if she stayed in Moab, she'd have nothing.
Okay, but I like to see her as, to journey to a foreign country. I mean, yes, that could be that this is her family. I'm not leaving my family. Right. I'm not leaving the only family I have. I'm going to go back to my parents' house after 10 years away as a widow. What would I have there? But I like to see her as, more heroic than
Well, I think she is. But I think it maybe wasn't such a big sacrifice. It was, I'm going to become a part of you. You are my people.
You are my people. You are my
Even so, throughout the text, she's still called Ruth the Moabite.
Very important, right? And that's what I wanted to point
They still call her
out.
that, no matter
Right.
what. So even though she pledged to be part of you, she's not.
Right. She is referred to as Ruth the Moabitess throughout the rest of the text, basically, which is very painful. I think it's very painful. Look, there's a whole rabbinic teaching, lots of rabbinic teachings about being extremely sensitive to the convert. And you're never supposed to remind them that they're a convert, and you're never supposed to mention they're a convert unless they're called to the Torah by Avraham Avinu. So there's sort of an inherent contradiction built into the tradition. And there's also, I think, something about human nature. Sometimes, probably for a lot of times people did it, it was maybe a little disdainful. Oh, they're a convert. Now I think maybe it's done with pride. Can you believe that they're, look at how much they've learned, look at how much they've done. We're very But still, right? But still, we still have, you know, maybe it's human nature, this sort of awareness, and maybe it's different in the reform movement, I don't know, but I'm speaking for my movement. I think there's still this awareness. I think people are more comfortable talking about, you know, their conversion and their process. The one thing I don't hear so much anymore that I used to hear when I was growing up is when somebody would want to convert to Judaism, the response would be, why? Why would you want to do? That's a really great selling point for our religion. Like, we're Jewish people. I can't even figure out why you'd want to do that. You know, like, it should be so obvious. We have this wonderful tradition. Who wouldn't want to be a part of it? But we were sort of dumbfounded, maybe after thousands of years of anti-Semitism could do that to a person, but we were sort of dumbfounded, you know, why would anybody want to be part of this? I don't think that's part of our culture anymore, right? I don't think any of us would say, why would you want to do this? But the question of what does it mean for society to be aware when somebody's still different and considered an outsider, and in this society, Ruth is part of it. We're always reminded by the narrator that she is a Moabitess.
Okay, so I also believe in that things become rules. Be kind to the person, because it wasn't easy. It didn't happen. And when we stand up during a service because we're in mourning, it reminds the community, and we put the spotlight on ourselves. Be kinder to that person. So possibly the fact of the label reminds us it's not just anybody. We have to treat them even more special. It's part of our rules if we're educated enough to know those rules.
Well, we're not supposed to mistreat the stranger, but yeah, we're reminded that she's a stranger.
We use the term Jew by choice.
Right, Jew by choice.
I don't know if you know, why do you do all these things? Well, that's the way I grew up, and my mother said I had to go to Sunday school. I had to do this, but now you become a Jew by choice. Now it's your choice.
Yeah, the interesting thing about that phrase, Jew by choice, right? We don't say convert, we say Jew by choice. But one of the interesting things that I've heard people talk about is that in the times that we're living in, we're all Jews by choice. You know, because people aren't saying to their children anymore, you have to do this. Or they may say to their children for a certain age, and then they decide, well, when they turn 13, they can make a decision whether they're going to continue their Jewish education or not. You know, and I'm like, you're going to give a 13-year-old a choice about, you know, so it's in it, but, so we do live in a, practice, we all practice by our own choice, right? Nobody's good, we don't have a mitzvah, please. You know, in the shtetl, you did things whether you believed or you didn't believe, that the peer pressure to do what everybody else was doing was so strong that there was, you know, people did break out of that after emancipation, but it was really, you know, you just did what everybody else did because there's such, you know, peer pressure to do it. So we all now don't have that kind of same peer pressure, and certainly not the younger generation. Like, we still, maybe some of us still grew up with certain expectations that our parents and grandparents had. But it's, you know, their desires, that we might have for our children and our grandchildren, the rigid lines of what we expect people to do. So when they do anything, they do it because they want to do it, which I think is actually, there's something beautiful about that. It's, you know, it's unknown, it's a little scary, but there's something very, I mean, I will say the other thing about Jews by choice that I've worked with, that I've seen such a change, even in the, you know, in the 25 years that I was in the rabbinate, is that even early in my rabbinate, people would convert to marry somebody because the Jewish partner said that they couldn't marry them. Or the mother said it. Somebody said it, and this person did it. Today, I would say 99%, I think it's happened to me once in 10 years, people convert now because they want to convert. The Jewish spouse will not, the Jewish young person will not say, you have to do this or I can't marry you. As a matter of fact, they feel that there's something terrible. And actually, the truth is there is, right? If you don't change in a significant way, I'm not going to marry you, is not the most romantic statement a person can make. And truthfully, in any other rule in marriage, you would say you can't say that, right? You can't say to somebody, if you don't change in this way, I'm not going to marry you. You would know that that's very bad. So the converts, the Jews by choice that now come to me, are amazing, candidates because they would want to do this. They saw something that was beautiful in our tradition that they want to be part of. And that is, so that's an amazing thing to see.
Now we've got it where I will marry you though you're not Jewish, but I want the children to be
Right.
Jewish.
I mean, I will say still, most of the young people who intermarry in my congregation, the children are being raised Jewish. But because of the world that we live in today, it doesn't have to be so often, but it happens on occasion that the grandparents who are members of the congregation call me and say, do I go to the baptism or don't I? Of my grandchild. And, this is the reverse, right? This is the reverse. Like, what a painful, painful thing. My advice, and every rabbi would give different advice, is you want to have a relationship with this grandchild. You're going to need to just, you can call me before on the way there crying. You can call me on the way home crying. But you want your daughter-in-law, or, usually the daughter-in-law, obviously the daughter-in-law, but the child would either be halakhically Jewish, but in the conservative movement. But really in this day and age, if you want to have a relationship with this child, what choices do you really have? Now I realize that, in Orthodoxy that would be, you'd never hear a rabbi say that, but,
I experienced something at the other end of the spectrum when I was singing at an interfaith wedding in church, and with a Jewish groom and a Christian bride under the cross. And the groom's parents were sitting there right in front. You could see them. Just in pain, almost in tears. But they were there to support their son. And what happened later, I don't know.
Want to have a religion? All right. This is all interesting, but we have a lot to get to. You're going to have to do me for a fourth session for chapter 4. All right. The two went on. When they arrived in Bethlehem, the whole city buzzed with excitement over them. So there's a memory, right? Naomi's home. The women said, "Can this be Naomi?" And look at her response. "Do not call me Naomi," she replied. "Call me Mara, for Shaddai has made my lot very bitter." Right? We already heard that she was bitter. Her lot is very bitter. Now just remember who's standing next to her. "I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty. How can you call me Naomi when the Lord has dealt harshly with me, when Shaddai has brought misfortune upon me?" So I think if we wondered why, Naomi was silent, I mean, if you have nothing nice to say, don't say anything at all. Like, she's great. I assume she's grateful for Ruth. She must care about Ruth. But they can't make up for the loss that she's experienced.
Why does she use the name Shaddai as, we know that that's what
Right, it's one of the names of God.
Right.
Shaddai, we're told in our tradition, interestingly enough, is a name that Abraham knew God by. So there could be this connection back again to Abraham. But I don't know why, other than that, why Shaddai at this moment.
Is Shaddai usually considered a fertility god?
Yeah.
I don't know, but the fertility, well, that would be interesting. The God, the God that, the aspect of our God that looks over fertility has left me empty. What a punishment, right? I went away full and I came back as empty. I wrote that on the board last week, right? Emptiness and fullness. So she's back, she's home, everybody's excited to see her, and Naomi is pleasant, right? The name is pleasant. Don't call me pleasant, call me Mara. By the way, I hope nobody here has children or grandchildren named Mara. We use that name, and it's not an uncommon name in Hebrew, but frankly, from this text, it might not be the name that you'd want to,
So does it actually mean bitter?
Yes, Mar is bitter, like Maror, right? So it means bitter. So she is but I do feel bad for Ruth at this moment. I feel bad for Naomi. I think we can understand that she's devastated, and even Ruth coming with her doesn't make up for any of her loss, really. But you kind of have to feel bad for Ruth, who's just standing there like, okay, could you say I'm empty, but for her? At least she came, so I can feel bad for Ruth right now.
Does Mara have a different, I know I teach you know, Hebrew school. So it's a very popular
Yes.
name, not so much now, but years ago. Why would they name? I know some very traditional people.
I don't. Oh, they don't know what it means, and it just sounds.
No, these are people very traditional. Is there another meaning for this?
Not that I know. You know what the truth is? If you start looking at lots of names, you know, you could really, you know, Tamar is a very popular name, and that's. There's a rape, you know, there's like, you know, she was raped, so it's like, you know, so I don't know, maybe there are other names that are popular too, but I don't know, and I don't know how Mara caught on as it did.
I could give Naomi a little bit of slack by saying when she said what she did, she's not thinking about her relationship with Ruth, but the fact that she'll never be a grandmother.
Right. But listen, it's wonderful that she, you know, that Ruth came with her, but there's no expectation that, you know, I lost my husband, I lost my sons, I have no grandchildren, life has just been, you know, great, but Ruth's here. But you just, this is just a little acknowledgement, like all of these terrible things happened, I went away full, I came back empty, but this is my daughter-in-law Ruth, and she's accompanied me, and I'm grateful for that.
But
it's
still Ruth the Moabite.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Let's look at the next verse. Thus, Naomi returned from the country of Moab. She returned with her daughter-in-law. Now she's back to daughter-in-law, not daughter. Ruth the Moabite. Ruth the Moabite. And she's referred to that again and again in the rest of the chapters. They arrived in Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest. So I asked the question last week, why do we read this on Shavuot? So obviously, you know, the main reason that we read it on Shavuot is this idea that on Shavuot we celebrate the receiving of the Ten Commandments. It's as if each of us, you know, celebrates the receiving of the Torah, and Ruth becomes this model of the first Jew by choice who voluntarily accepts upon herself the Torah. But the other thing is that Shavuot is the time of the barley harvest. So, you know, it could be really, it could be as simple as that, you know, that this is the time of the year we should read it because this is the time of the year that they're coming back. So also this Bethlehem, right, Beit Lechem, that was empty of bread because there was a famine, they are now back and there's a harvest. Okay, chapter 2. All right, we're gonna do it. All right, now Naomi had a kinsman on her husband's side, a man of substance of the family of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. So, from the barley harvest to this new piece of information, right? This new piece of information. What is there?
A man.
A kinsman, a kinsman, who would be the next in line. We talked last week about the Levirate marriage, right? Who could possibly be the next in line. And what else does this man have? Of substance. Right, not just any man, a wealthy man who is in town and related. But also, look how the Bible, look how it builds the anticipation in this one little sentence. A kinsman on her husband's side, so it would have to be on the husband's side to be appropriate for a Levirate marriage. A man of substance, of the family of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz, right? So strength is in him. But so strength is in him. So that's nice too. Not sickness and death, right? Strength.
Still make babies.
Strength. There you go. There you go. Now there is there's a pattern in the Torah that happens 3 times, like what we call betrothal sequences. Robert Alter, in his book on the art of biblical narrative, points out that there are certain stories that reoccur in the Torah, but each time they reoccur, they're told slightly differently, which gives us some indication of the characters and who they are. So there are 3 times that betrothals happen in the Torah. They all happen at wells. So you know that when people are out by the wells in the Torah, a match is going to be made, you know? And so the first one is Rebecca at the well, right? And she becomes Isaac's wife. Isaac's not there. right? Isaac's not there, which is, Isaac is a very passive personality in the Torah, you know, so he's not there, he's not even there arranging his own betrothal. Rebecca draws water for all the camels. I had a congregant that actually figured out, because I think it said how many camels he had, like 7, and I had a congregant that figured out, I can't remember what it was, but if X number of gallons per camel, it was some like, I don't know, 100 gallons, it was a lot of water to draw for one woman. So we hear, as we learn of her strength, and she brings them home, so we learn of her, you know, generosity. Jacob meets Rachel at the well. He waters her camels. He whirls the rock back from the well. Moses meets Zipporah at the well. He fights off the other shepherds, which is Moses' personality. So we're about to get a betrothal story. This gives us this indication, even though we're not at a well at the moment, this indication of there's a man. There's an eligible man of substance. So, Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, I would like to go to the fields and glean among the ears of grain behind someone who may show me kindness. Right? Now, does she know about Boaz? No, right? The narrator, we know about Boaz. But nobody else, you know, she doesn't know yet. The reader has been given this piece of information that Ruth and maybe even Naomi don't actually have at this moment. Just someone, right? Now, the rules of gleaning in the Torah are that you're supposed to leave the corners of your fields, right? That you leave the corners of your fields for the poor people to come in and to harvest. And it's considered, you know, giving them the dignity to be able to come in and be harvesters. But in addition to the corner of the fields, and you're also supposed to leave for the poor people anything that's forgotten, which, so if it's forgotten, okay, but if you remember it after the fact, you can't go back and get it. So you bundled something up and you left it, you meant to go get it later, and you forgot, you can't go back the next day and get it. So anything that's forgotten and anything that's dropped. Right? Anything that's dropped is also left for the gleaners. So most workers, of course, are probably never going to want to drop a lot of things because you'd like to be hired back again. And if you're the kind of person that forgets things and drops things, you're not going to be considered a very good worker. But if you're the kind of person that realizes that someone is gleaning behind you, and you let something fall, and they can then pick it up, this is what somebody that will show her kindness. Right? It's not going to be so thorough, but it's a quandary, right? Because you want your boss to be happy with you. You want to be hired back. At the other moment, you're still having compassion for this person who you know is not getting any kind of wage, and the only thing they're probably going to have to eat is what they're able to glean from the harvest. So, yes, daughter, go. So we're going to play back and forth with this, and it's sort of interesting that she chooses to call her daughter. The narrator calls her Ruth the Moabite. Naomi says to her, yes, daughter, go. Ruth is taking care of Naomi. Ruth is now actually going to drive the female action in the story. You know, once she makes that speech, Naomi's very passive, and Ruth is going to become the driving force. And what she's basically saying to her is, you know, I'll support you. You know, I'm young enough and healthy enough. I have to assume that gleaning is not easy. I'm young enough and healthy enough, and I'm going to go out and don't worry, we're going to have food. And off she went. She came and gleaned in a field behind the reapers, and as luck would have it, it was the piece of land belonging to Boaz of Elimelech's family. You know, who knew, right? That she doesn't happen, you know, she doesn't know that he exists. So remember, you know, Naomi says, you know, look what God has done to me. And now you've got to wonder, you know, is God's hand in this, that the story is now going to turn out, you know, happier, that just by coincidence, she ends up in Boaz's field, who we know is the appropriate partner for her and is a man of substance. So, you know, from a you know, movie, you know, I don't know if anybody likes, like movies, like Westerns. Robert Alter talks about this when he talks about, like, these conceits. But you know in a Western, right, with the girl, you're gonna meet the girl, then probably you're gonna lose the girl, then you're gonna get back together in the end. I actually have to say one of my, I like to read romances. I like to read romances in my spare time. And I read it on the Kindle, on my Kindle. So I can tell you now, between 85% and 92%, there's going to be a crisis that breaks the two of them up. But then they'll get back together. And I'm always very happy when some author, brave author, decides to break that formula and there's no crisis and they just stay together. But movies do that too. Any love stories, any romantic, you know, there's certain conceits, right, that you know that, you know, especially in old movies, right? The bad guy, what's going to happen to the bad guy? Right? Nothing good's going to happen to the bad guy. You know, in modern movies, it's turned on its head, right? So the bad guy could, you know, and anything could happen. But in old movies, the bad guy's going to get what he deserves. The hero's going to, you know, get the girl. There's going to be trouble, but he'll get her off the railroad tracks and untie her in time before the train comes. So this is doing it to a certain extent too, right? It's telling all of us what the characters themselves don't know yet, that everything is aligned for these two people to end up together. But before we get too overly romantic about this, let's look at Boaz. Presently, Boaz arrived from Bethlehem, and he greeted the reapers, "The Lord be with you." And they responded, "The Lord bless you." What might this tell us about how old Boaz is? Right. He's probably more like a peer of Naomi's, right? The idea that someone who issues blessings is someone that's older. The way he uses Hebrew is more old-fashioned, like Naomi. So this idea that he's this, you know, handsome young guy that's going to swoop in, he's not, probably. And we're going to see the use of the word na'ar, referring to the young gleaners, which Boaz is not referred to as young. That he's probably closer to Naomi's generation.
Where are they, if he arrived from Bethlehem, where are they gleaning? Where is this happening?
Right, the fields must be outside, right? And the Bethlehem's a city, and the fields are somehow outside. And by the way, when people gleaned outside and they were far away from the city, what did they build to sleep in? Sukkot, right? That's why they built them, right? So that you could have a place to sleep while you were, you know, because it was too far to go back and forth to Bethlehem every night. So, the Lord bless you. And they respond, "The Lord bless you." Boaz said to the servants who is in charge of the reapers, "Whose girl is that?" Right? He refers to her as a na'ara, right? Yes.
Boaz said, "The Lord be with you," and the women said, "The Lord bless you." They're blessing him.
Well, to the reapers, right? But the reapers are responding, right? But it's sort of, I'm trying to think what the exact phrase is, but you know, but there are groups of Christians that do this, right? The Lord be with you,
Yeah, right.
be with
Yeah,
you,
with you.
yeah, with you,
Yeah.
right? It's
Actually, a young girl was expelled from school the first week of school because everyone comes back, "Well, how was your summer? How are you?" And her reply was, "Bless you." "Hey, how are you?" "Good, bless you." And they suspended her because of the religion of the school.
okay. Look, you know, this is not doesn't invoke the name of God, but in Eastern European Jewish society, you would see somebody and say Shalom Aleichem, and they would respond to you Aleichem HaShalom, right? And I think that actually that phrase is very similar in Arabic also, where they do that and then peace be upon you. But there are, you know, groups of Christians that, you know, the Lord bless you, and the Lord, that's how you greet each other. So Boaz, when he comes out into the field and says to the reapers, "The Lord bless you," and they say, you know, that's their appropriate response, right? And that you're blessed too. But he's talking to the people that are working for him, right? The people that are working for him. Whose girl is that? Right. She's a na'ara, right? She's referred to as a na'ara, young girl, young. The servant in charge of the reapers replied, "She is a Moabite girl who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab, She said, please let me glean and gather among the sheaves behind the reapers. She has been on her feet ever since she came this morning. She has rested a little in the hut. Hard worker, right? She's a Moabite, right? She's came back with Naomi. What little piece of information doesn't say that she's Naomi's daughter-in-law, right? For all we know, she could be Naomi's servant. But she's a Moabite, right? So she's an outsider. This is who she is. However, she's an incredibly hard worker. She's worked all day long and hasn't rested.
Plus, she's a Moabite from Moab, in case
Right.
you didn't know.
Right, that's right. That's right. Okay, right, that's right. She's a Moabite. But again, like this repetition, right? That, a Moabite from Moab. She's a Moabite. She's the Moabite. The story, because we've looked so carefully at the use of language in this story, and when the Bible repeats a word, it's giving us a very strong message. And this is the message. Now, I don't know if the message intends to be that it's important for us as the reader to always remember that she's a Moabite, like we would have forgotten, we're only in the middle of chapter 2, or if it's just telling us something about the society that she's living in. You know, the society that she's living in is not going to forget that she's a stranger. And that cues us, because how we treat strangers is such an important part of our of Jewish law. Boaz said to Ruth, listen to me, daughter. Right? Because she's much younger than him. Right? He is her protector. He's stepping up to be her protector, but in a very fatherly way. This is not really where we would have wanted the story to go if we were people that like romance novels, right? This is not exactly how we would have wanted the story to go. We want this sweeping romance where their eyes meet across the room and all they can see is each other and they're going to end up married and living happily ever after. So it's not Cinderella in that way.
He's no prince either.
He's no prince. He's older. He's older. But he can care for her. He can take care of her. And he wants to take care of her. And he's not a lech. Right? He's not a lech. Because he's looking at her in a fatherly way and protecting her.
And he just met her, right? So at this point, there's not romance involved. It happens quickly, but.
Right. But when you call somebody my daughter, it doesn't set the tone in quite the same way that we might, you know. But the Torah is not really interested in romance per se, right? I mean, we do have Jacob and Rachel, and we're told that Jacob loves Rachel. But on the whole, the Torah is not really concerned with romance. The Torah is concerned with making sure that there's a next generation, that the Jewish people continue, that there's someone to take over the line, that people that are vulnerable in society, like widows and orphans, are cared for. That's what they're in. It's probably not different than most ancient societies. You know, people didn't marry for love. That's a very modern notion. You know, that people should marry for love, and there's a soulmate out there. I guess, you know, your soulmate is the person that's going to be able to take care of you and make sure that you can have a child. That's your soulmate. But the fact that he calls her, because just because she's younger and he's older doesn't mean that he can't, you know, eye her for potential whatever. But he doesn't, right? He calls her my daughter. But she's also a Moabite, you know, and the fact that even that she's a Moabitess from Moab, but he calls her my daughter. He doesn't see her at that moment as a stranger. And that might be his greatest trait, right? His greatest trait is that he is, you know, a caring person who's not gonna just say, oh, well, she's leaving, that's nice, be nice to her.
And you realize he knows about her.
Right. Right, he's heard that this, you know, he's heard about her loyalty. Now he knows that she's an incredibly hard worker. He knows that she's providing for Naomi, and he takes her under his protection. Don't go to glean in another field. Don't go elsewhere, but stay here close to my girls. Keep your eyes on the field they are reaping and follow them. I have ordered the men not to molest you. Right? And the men, he calls the men Na'arim, which are young men. Right? Young men. Being a young woman out in the field, away from the city of Bethlehem, being a Moabitess, she is so vulnerable. She is so vulnerable. I mean, they're out, they're out in the middle, in the middle of nowhere. They're sleeping in huts. She's not one of Boaz's girls, where we assume that the female reapers that are working for him are under his protection. So she's absolutely vulnerable, and there are a lot of young men around that could take advantage of her, and she's a stranger. So she really has no real rights if she's taken advantage of. And it's not a good situation, but he offers her his protection. And when you are thirsty, go to the jars and drink some of the water that the men have drawn. So who's drawing the water in this story? The men are drawing. Sometimes we have the women drawing, sometimes we have the men drawing. But you mean there's water being drawn means somebody's going to get married in the Torah and the Bible. So this is good. Like it might have thrown you off track when he called her my daughter, but don't worry about that because there's going to be some water drawing going on, and this reminds us of the Torah. She prostrated herself with her face to the ground and said to him, "Why are you so kind as to single me out when I am a foreigner?" And she knows, right, that nobody's being that. And in Moab society too, that's probably the way it is. The tables have turned. Her husband was a foreigner in Moab. Now she's a foreigner here, and she's really taken aback at how nice he's being to her, and that not the expectation that this is how you treat people. And Boaz said in reply, "I have been told of all that you did for your mother-in-law after the death of your husband, how you left your father and mother and the land of your birth and came to a people you had not known before. Lech lecha, mi'artzecha, mimoladecha," right? That was God's command to Abraham. Go forth from the land, from the place of your birth, from the house of your father, to the land that I will show you. And that's the words that Boaz is basically paraphrasing to her, right? How you left your father and mother, the land of your birth, and came to a people you had not known before. The exact opposite, right, of Ruth. Not that you're a foreigner, but what you've done is so above and beyond what a normal person would do. Work as a normal person, lovely, normal, went home. This is just beyond. To go with a mother-in-law and to leave your parents and the land of your birth, how could I not, want to help you?
It seems to me also a hint that she had not been treated well by other people.
You would think not, right? It does not sound like she had a warm welcome by the rest of the society, because she's, let's say, really surprised, because she could have bowed down and said thank you. But for her to express to him such surprise specifically, and I think that's the interplay with the text constantly referring to her as a Moabite, is to give us the clue of how the society is treating her. And so then she's so surprised that this wealthy man of substance, who called her daughter, so seemingly does not want to take advantage of her in a sexual way, is willing to help her. She's so stunned that she actually tells him why she's so stunned. And he tells her everything that he's heard about her and what an incredible, thing that she has done. May the Lord reward your deeds. May you have a full recompense from the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have sought refuge. Which is really beautiful, that phrase. We use that phrase about under God's wings in several places. We actually use it. There's a prayer when somebody dies, the Al-Malei Rachamim, and we ask that the person be taken under God's wings. In several years ago, the conservative movement put out a new rabbinical manual, rabbi's manual, and they translated it differently, and I don't like the translation. I always say, under the shelter of God's wings. Because it comes from the Bible, because it sort of resonates. I mean, I'm not really that worried that it's anthropomorphic and God doesn't really have wings. And I just think that there's something so, like a mother bird. It's also interesting, wings. I suppose angels maybe have wings, but the wings of us, to me it's almost maternal, right? A mother bird protecting its young. I think there's something very just that touches me about that. And it's just beautiful, like that this God that you have pledged yourself to, I hope that you get all of the protection that this God has to offer. She answered, "You are most kind, my Lord, to comfort me and to speak gently to your maidservant." And nobody has comforted her or spoken gently to her. Naomi, probably a lot of the time, is silent in her own grief. She doesn't making friends. She's kind of alone. She also lost her husband, lost everything. And this is maybe the first person that's protecting her and taking care of her. Interesting enough, or as apropos our earlier conversation, she just says thank you. Right? She doesn't say, she asks them why, but she says, oh, you don't have to do anything for me, I'm fine. You have to be at a certain level in life to be able to say, I don't need anything from you. There's certain people that are so desperate. Chris Rock, the comedian, I heard him do something once where he talked about, he visited Africa. So he says, you don't ever hear anybody in Africa saying, I don't eat red meat. I don't eat green meat. But other than that, I'll eat any meat that you'll give me. So you have to have a certain, stability to be able to say, I don't need, no thank you, I don't need your help, or I'll be fine, or don't worry about me. That's not where Ruth is, right? Things are so desperate. She is so grateful, and she expresses it in such a beautiful, one of the things that we know about Ruth is that, when she speaks so beautifully, and her language is so beautiful. Let's see if we have a few minutes. We have a few minutes left. Okay. So, you're most kind to speak so gently to your maidservant, though I'm not so much of one of your maidservants, right? I'm not even a worker, I'm a cleaner. Like I'm at the bottom here of the pile. At mealtime, Boaz said to her, come over here and partake of the meal, and dip your morsel in the vinegar. So she sat down beside the reapers. He handed her roasted grain, and she ate her fill and had some left over. Who knows when the last time she even had a good meal was, right? When she got up again to glean, Boaz gave orders to his workers, you are not only to let her glean among the sheaves without interference, but you also must pull some stalks out of the heaps and leave them for her to glean and not scold her, right? So not only, we talk about like when you're a good worker, you don't drop sheaves. He wants, right? And the interesting thing about this is he doesn't say, just give her some sheaves. Why? For dignity, right? Right? This is about protecting someone's dignity. So you accidentally drop sheaves. She gathers them. I'm not looking like I'm not going to look like I'm just doling out charity to her. She's here to glean. We're going to make sure she has plenty to glean. Don't, and it's okay. Which is so, you just have to love this guy. Like he's so kind and he's so sensitive. He doesn't care that she's a foreigner. Everything that the Torah expects a compassionate person to be, we see in Boaz. Doesn't take advantage of her, makes sure that he quietly helps her, doesn't care that she's a foreigner. Like he embodies so many of the laws of the Torah. Don't mistreat the stranger, don't mistreat the orphan.
I never heard the word vinegar. In that story. Was that a custom then?
Well, we know about dipping, right? But hold on, let's see what the word is in Hebrew. Chomets, which is vinegar. But we know, like we say in when we say the 4 questions, right? We say this night we dip twice. Most nights we only dip once. So it can be like a salad dressing, right? There's some sort of fermented, vinegary substance, and you dip your vegetables into it. So this gives you something about the custom of how they eat, roasted grain.
That also gives you an idea of what's grown there, because it would be olive oil if the land was thus used,
Right.
and it's not. So
Oh, that's
it
interesting.
gives you
Right.
actually gives you a location,
Right.
a physical location.
And they're eating roasted grain, it's the
Yeah.
barley harvest,
Right.
right? They're eating that which is harvested. Okay, she gleaned in the field until evening, then she beat out what she had gleaned, it was about an ephah of barley, and carried it back with her to the town. So again, in this one little sentence, what the heck do we learn about her? She's strong. Yeah. You could try gleaning all day long, and then beating out the harvest, which I assume is not easy, and then carrying it back to town.
Strong.
Strong, like the hardest of hard workers. You know, we learn about Rebecca when we read about Rebecca. She runs, she goes, she carries, you know, the Torah in a very short number of verses tells us a lot about Rebecca. And in many ways, Ruth and Rebecca are, you know, Ruth is like Rebecca, right? Ruth leaves her home without being commanded. Rebecca leaves her home without being commanded. Rebecca is strong and incredibly hard worker. Ruth is strong and an incredibly hard worker.
She's also Naomi's protector, so now she's going to share.
Right, that's right, that's right. And she comes home because she remembers, you know, she may have eaten her fill and had leftovers. When her mother-in-law saw what she had gleaned, and when she also took out and gave her what she had left over after eating her fill, right, so she brought home the extra. She brought home the extra for Naomi. Like Naomi's not strong enough to glean and to beat out and to carry and to do all these things, but she becomes the provider. You know, I said several times about the vulnerability of a widow and an orphan in society because you don't have a provider. Ruth becomes the provider. And for a woman in society that was, listen, for women in society today, you know, look at the statistics for what single mothers make in salary, you know, and this is in this country, but all over the world. But Ruth becomes the provider. Her mother-in-law asked her, "Where did you glean today?" It's such a delightful moment for those of us that know the answer. Where did you glean today? Where did you work? Blessed be he who took such generous notice of you. So Ruth's uttering blessings, Boaz is uttering blessings. That's why they speak in the same kind of more old-fashioned language. You know, so this is going to be the great moment, right? She told her mother-in-law whom she had worked with, saying, "The name of the man who I worked with today was Boaz." So the same thing with the sentence, building up the anticipation till the moment of telling Naomi that it was Boaz. Naomi explained to her daughter-in-law, "The man is related to us. He is one of our redeeming kinsmen." Ruth the Moabite said, "He even told me to stay close by my workers until all my harvest is finished." And Naomi answered her daughter-in-law, Ruth, "It is best, daughter, that you go out with his girls and not be annoyed in some other field." So she stayed close to the maidservants of Boaz and gleaned until the barley harvest and the wheat harvest were finished. Then she stayed at home with her mother-in-law. So stay tuned for what's going to happen next.
Do you think Naomi knew she'd have some part maybe in getting this?
Well, once she knows that, once she tells Ruth he's our redeeming kinsman, she gives Ruth a huge part of information. I mean, the assumption is that Ruth must know something about the idea of redeeming kinsmen because Naomi already said to her earlier, well, am I going to have any more sons? So that Ruth must have been like, if you didn't know anything about Levirate marriage, and Ruth says, Naomi says, am I going to have any other sons? Ruth would be like, I don't know what she's talking about. That's what an odd, thing to say. So there's sort of the assumption built in that Ruth must know something about the fact that if Naomi had other sons, they would be obligated to marry her. So then when Naomi gives her the information, he's a redeeming kinsman, this could be an appropriate match. We're going to see how Ruth deals with it next week. But this could be an appropriate, this could be somebody who could really, you know, this isn't just a temporary situation where he's gleaning, and we're so happy to know that he could be, we already knew it, of course, but how kind he is, right? That he's not just gonna be somebody that's gonna, you know, marry her to provide financially for her, but he's a very nice guy, even though he's much older than her.
I've read some interpretation of the story as Ruth and Naomi being partners, being lovers and partners. And I'm just,
What?
well, there's certainly a lot of, you know, now Ruth's the provider, and she gives a marriage vow, practically. I mean, there's this whole, and she has a child who then she gives to Naomi. I mean, there's lots of things that you could certainly say. And I'm just curious.
I guess I'll say two things about that. The first one is I've never read anything like that, so this is the first time that I'm hearing it, and so my gut reaction is, you know, no. But I will say one thing. Because people do that too, and I have heard this with, you know, the story of Jonathan and David, right, who are, you know, such close friends. When feminism began in, you know, 20 years ago, and I think I even mentioned this last week, this idea that we women started looking for women in the text, and started saying, you know, who are these women, who are our role models, how do we relate to them? How do we bring them forth? Because sometimes they're not spoken about as much. I think I probably said to you that one year when I gave a sermon, all of the Haftarot for Rosh Hashanah are about, you know, Sarah and Rachel and Hannah. Somebody said, oh, it was a woman's sermon. I'm like, but if I had given a sermon about Abraham and Isaac, you would have never said it's a man's sermon. But here they are. Why do you think the rabbis put all these stories of women? Like, so that we would ignore them? So I will say that if you were gay, you might want to do the same thing, right? Where am I in this text? Because the only thing I have in this text is that what I do is an abomination. So where am I in the text? Where can I look for something that would say, my story is here too? I think it's a huge stretch, but I do understand sort of the feeling of why you would want to find yourself in the text, because it's sometimes it's even hard as a woman to find yourself in the text, and if you're gay, it's that much harder to find yourself in the text. So, anybody else?
We talked about always our mothers having been infertile and unable to conceive. Is there anywhere that a man is described as being the one who was unable to have children?
Yeah, but I don't know what they understood biologically. Yeah, you know, I don't know what they understood, if they understood, well, there's two things. One is I don't know if they understood biologically that it could be the man and not just the woman. But since so many of these men had more than one wife and their other wives had children, then it points to that it had to be the woman.
It's like Henry VIII didn't realize that it's
right.
a male that...
That's right. They didn't know the biology, but, you know, Abraham has somebody with Hagar. Jacob has 1 million children with Leah and the concubines. Hannah's husband has children with his other wife. So I don't know, this may be the only story with Ruth and with Orpah that there are no other wives involved to know who, you know, but this is also part of destiny, right? She was meant to come to Israel and have her children there with, or have a child there with Boaz. You know, that was her destiny. Do you think?
I was just going to say, are you going to get into the family tree of Boaz?
Yeah, they'll come at the very end, right? The genealogy
Where he comes
comes.
from.
Right. You got it. We'll get.
He's the son of Perez.
Right. Yeah, when we get to the end, that's the very end, and that's the. We'll get to that. That's the very end when we get to the genealogies of where these people come from and who then who they are the progenitors of. All right. We have 2 chapters next week.